There is a photograph taken in 1968 that almost nobody talks about anymore. In it, a young woman stands at the edge of a stage in Paris, her eyes blazing with something that looks like fury but is really closer to grief. She is beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful when they are breaking apart. Radiant, electric, dangerous. She doesn't know yet that the next 5 decades of her life will be defined not by the roles she plays on screen, but by the wars she chooses to fight off of it. She doesn't know that the woman she becomes will be celebrated and despised, worshipped and burned in effigy, praised on the cover of magazines, and hanged in newspapers on the very same week. And she certainly doesn't know, cannot possibly know, that the greatest performance of her entire life will not happen in front of any camera. It will happen quietly, in a hospital room, in the winter of her final years, when the lights are low and the applause is long gone. What breaks a woman who survived everything? What heals a person who spent a lifetime believing she didn't deserve to be? And what does it mean to finally become yourself when you are 80 years old and the clock is already running out? She was born on December 21st, 1937, in New York City, the second child of Henry Fonda and Frances Ford Seymour. And from the very first breath she drew, the world had already written a story for her. Her father was not simply a famous man. Henry Fonda was a monument, a marble statue that walked and spoke and occasionally ate dinner, but never quite warmed to the touch. He was a man of iron silences and immovable discipline, a man whose reputation was built on portrayals of moral integrity and righteous fury, and who carried those qualities home every single evening like a briefcase full of cold air. The house they lived in was beautiful in the way that museum exhibits are beautiful, correct, arranged, untouchable. Young Jane and her brother Peter moved through it carefully, the way children learn to move through spaces that do not quite belong to them. Her mother, Frances, was a woman of extraordinary elegance and profound internal suffering. She had grown up in a family with money and expectations, married into Hollywood royalty, and found herself slowly consumed by a darkness that nobody in the 1940s had the language to name. Depression, anxiety, a deep and ancient wound that she carried somewhere beneath her ribs and could never fully find the words to describe. Jane would later say that she sensed her mother's pain the way animals sense approaching storms. Not logically, not intellectually, but in the body, in the chest, in the sudden drop of the stomach when a room goes wrong. Frances smiled at dinner parties and cried in rooms that children were not supposed to enter. She held herself together in public the way paper holds together in a light rain. For a while, carefully, and then all at once, not at all. The marriage was not a happy one. Henry Fonda had a restlessness that no woman could satisfy and no home could contain. He was chronically distant, reliably unfaithful, and almost completely incapable of expressing warmth to the people he loved most. Jane would spend decades, literally decades, trying to understand her father, trying to reach him, trying to earn something from him that he simply did not know how to give. She once described sitting across from him at a table and feeling the particular, unbearable loneliness of being invisible to someone who is looking directly at you. That loneliness would become the engine of almost everything she did. It would drive her to stages and protest lines and therapist offices and weight loss regimens and 4 different marriages. It would chase her across the Atlantic and back again. It would not let her rest. The defining wound came on April 14, 1950. Jane was 12 years old. Frances Fonda was 42, residing at Craig House, a psychiatric facility in Beacon, New York, where she had been admitted following what the family described, in the careful language of the era, as a nervous breakdown. The truth was considerably darker. Frances was in the grip of a mental illness that had not responded to the treatments available at the time, which in 1950 were blunt and brutal and often made things worse. She was frightened and confused, and she missed her children, and she had, at some point in those long institutional days, lost her hold on any reason to stay. On that April morning, she used a razor blade from a small manicure kit to end her life. She was alone when it happened. She died on the cold tile floor of a bathroom in a hospital where she had been sent to be kept safe. Jane found out not from her father, who could not bring himself to say the words, but from a classmate at school who had read it in a newspaper. Read it. In a newspaper. Like a stranger. Like something that happened to other people. She walked home that afternoon carrying a story she wasn't supposed to know yet, a grief she hadn't been prepared to hold, and an understanding, arriving too young, too fast, too hard, that the people who love you can disappear without warning and that the world will simply print it in the paper and move on. She never forgot it. How could she? That razor, that bathroom, that cold April morning. It would become the shadow behind every relationship she attempted, the bruise beneath every performance she ever gave, the reason she spent so many years convinced, in the deepest and most irrational part of herself, that she was somehow not enough to make someone stay. And then it got worse. Because grief, in a family like the Fondas, was not discussed. It was compressed. It was managed. Henry Fonda remarried within the year. A woman named Susan Blanchard who was closer in age to Jane than to Henry, and the household rearranged itself around the new arrangement the way families do when they have no other choice. Jane was sent to Emma Willard School in Troy, New York, and then to Vassar College, and she moved through these places like someone sleepwalking through a painting, present in form, but somewhere else entirely in spirit. She was funny and sharp and social and desperately, secretly adrift. She ate too little. She performed for approval with an intensity that unnerved people who looked too closely. She was running, always running, and she had not yet identified what she was running from. The lowest point of Jane Fonda's early life did not announce itself dramatically. It crept in the way illness creeps, gradually, then suddenly, then everywhere. By the time she was in her late teens and early 20s, she had developed what she would later call, with characteristic bluntness, a full-blown eating disorder. Bulimia, a secret she kept for 25 years. 25 years. Through the making of Clute and Coming Home, through the exercise empire and the workout videos and the leotards and the magazine covers and the fitness philosophy she preached to millions of women. Through all of it, she was purging. Daily. Sometimes multiple times a day. Standing in bathrooms and film studios and hotel rooms and her own home, erasing herself bite by bite, maintaining control over the one thing that felt controllable in a life that felt fundamentally out of her hands. This is important to say plainly because it was not said plainly for a very long time. The Jane Fonda of the 1980s who sold millions of workout tapes and built a fitness empire was, simultaneously, a woman in the grip of a disorder that was slowly damaging her body and systematically dismantling her sense of self. The image and the reality existed in almost perfect contradiction. Outside, strength, discipline, physical perfection. Inside, shame, secrecy, the particular exhaustion of maintaining a lie at scale. She would say later that she was not performing health. She was performing the idea of control, which is a very different thing, and performing it for an audience of millions who had no idea they were watching someone disappear in slow motion. She almost lost herself entirely somewhere around 1970. This was the period of greatest extremity, not just the eating disorder, but the political intensity, the first marriage dissolving, the fury at the Vietnam War, the burning need to matter in a way that went beyond the screen. She felt, in those years, like a lit match in a room full of paper. Everything was urgent. Everything was enormous. Everything was now. She was 32 years old, and she had not yet cried properly for her mother. She had not yet sat with her father and said the true thing. She had not yet learned that you cannot carry every war in the world on a body that you are actively trying to destroy. And then, and this is the moment that matters, the hinge on which everything turns, she stopped. Not completely, not cleanly, not all at once. But she stopped long enough to ask a question she had never been willing to ask before. What am I actually doing? Not on the screen. Not in the protest lines. Not in the marriage that had become a political alliance as much as a love. But what am I actually doing to myself, and why, and when did it start? That question, raw, unguarded, terrifying, was the first real act of courage in a life full of what the world had called courageous acts. The breakthrough came quietly, in the early 1980s, with a therapist's office and a truth she had been holding for 25 years. She told someone. She said it out loud. The eating disorder. The purging. The years of it. The scope of it. The shame of it. And the strange thing, the thing she had not expected, was that the world did not end. She had believed, on some cellular level, that to be truly seen was to be truly abandoned. The way her mother had been seen and then lost. The way her father had looked through her at dinner tables across 3 decades. But the therapist did not flinch. The truth did not destroy her. And something in her, some small, starved, essential part, began, for the first time, to breathe. She threw herself into work with the ferocity of someone who has been given a second chance and knows it. The fitness empire was already growing. Jane Fonda's workout, released in 1982, would become the best-selling VHS tape in history at that time, a cultural phenomenon that redefined how American women thought about their bodies and their strength. There is a supreme irony in this, and she has spoken about it honestly. The woman who taught millions of others to love and inhabit their bodies was still, privately, at war with hers. But the work itself, the movement, the discipline, the community of women sweating and striving together, was slowly, imperfectly, functioning as its own kind of healing. She was teaching something she was in the process of learning. She was leading people toward a place she had not yet arrived at herself. And maybe that is more honest than it sounds, because most great teachers are also still students. The rise of Jane Fonda in the 1970s and 1980s was not a straight line. It was a series of explosions, each one larger and more controversial than the last. Her Academy Award for Clute in 1972 established her as one of the finest actresses of her generation. Not a famous man's daughter, not a pretty face, but a serious artist with a ferocious intelligence and an instinct for emotional truth that left critics searching for new words. She won again for Coming Home in 1979, a film about Vietnam veterans that she had helped to produce, and that win felt different. It felt earned in the specific way that things feel earned when you have bet everything on them. She was producing, political, loud, and utterly unmanageable by the standards of Hollywood's power structure, which had not been designed with women like her in mind. And then came 1972 and Hanoi. The photograph, the one that certain people will never let die. Jane Fonda sitting on a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun, laughing, the artillery aimed at the sky. The image detonated across America like a bomb. Veterans who had survived the war, men who had lost friends and limbs and years of their lives, saw it and felt a rage so pure it became permanent. She was called Hanoi Jane. She was burned in effigy. She received death threats. Some VFW halls banned her from entry for the rest of her natural life. The cruelty of the reception was specific and personal in a way that ordinary criticism is not. This was not a bad review. This was a verdict on her humanity. She has addressed it many times, in many different ways, across many different decades, and her account of it has evolved as she has evolved. She has said she was naive. She has said she was used. She has said she regrets the photograph deeply and without qualification. She has also said that her opposition to the war itself, the part that brought her to Hanoi in the first place, the conviction that American soldiers were dying for a lie, she does not regret that. And that distinction, for many people, was never going to be enough. The image was too powerful, the wound too deep, the politics too charged. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. And Fonda has lived with that particular door for more than 50 years. It is part of her. It is the thing she carries the way her mother carried grief, in the body, beneath the ribs, always. The reinvention that followed was not theatrical. It was internal, slow, and built on things the cameras could not easily film. Therapy, faith, the decision to stop running and start examining. She became a Christian in the early 2000s, a conversion that surprised many people who had known her as an avowed secular leftist. She has described it not as a rejection of everything she had been before, but as a discovery of something she had always been reaching for, a sense of being loved that was not contingent on performance or achievement or the perfect maintenance of an impossible image. The God she found was not punitive. He was not distant. He was not like Jane Fonda. He was, in her telling, the first relationship in her life in which she was not required to be anything other than what she actually was. She married Ted Turner in 1991, her third marriage, and for a while it seemed like a genuine and improbable happiness. They were enormous personalities navigating an enormous life, private jets, ranches, philanthropic empires, and there was real warmth between them, real laughter, real partnership. But Fonda was also, in those years, disappearing again in a different way, becoming Ted Turner's wife, shrinking her own opinions to fit within his, giving up things, friendships, commitments, pieces of herself, in the service of a relationship that required her to be a supporting character in someone else's story. When they divorced in 2001, she said something that became one of the most honest things she has ever said in public. She said she had never learned to be in a relationship without losing herself. She said she had been disappearing into men since she was a girl, trying to make her father notice her at the dinner table. She said it without self-pity, without drama, with the particular calm of someone who has finally seen the shape of a pattern they spent 40 years living inside. The final years of Jane Fonda have been something genuinely unexpected, a late-life flowering that seems almost biologically impossible and yet is entirely real. Grace and Frankie, the Netflix series she made with Lily Tomlin beginning in 2015, gave her something that Hollywood almost never gives women past a certain age: a leading role in a story about women past a certain age. The show ran for 7 seasons. It was funny and warm and specific and true, and Fonda inhabited it with a looseness, a willingness to be imperfect and ridiculous and fully human, that she had not always permitted herself on screen. She was in her late 70s, doing some of the best work of her career. That is not a small thing. That is a remarkable thing. In September 2022, she announced a diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer. She delivered the news on social media with characteristic directness. This is happening. These are the facts. I am doing chemotherapy. I am lucky to have access to good health care. Many people don't, and that disparity is a political problem we need to fix. Even cancer, in Jane Fonda's hands, became a call to action, and she was doing it in her 80s. Still at the marches, still at the meetings, still, impossibly still. She announced in November 2022 that the cancer was in remission. She kept going. What she stands for now is harder to summarize than what she stood for at 30, when everything was sharp lines and clear positions and righteous fury. What she stands for now is more like a question than an answer. What does it mean to keep becoming? What does it mean to look back at a long life and resist the temptation to clean it up, to sand down the rough edges, to turn it into a lesson instead of a life? She has not done that. She has kept the contradictions in the frame, the feminism and the eating disorder, the political courage and the Hanoi photograph, the faith and the marriages, the fitness empire and the body she was destroying while she built it. She has kept them all. And there is something in that refusal to simplify that feels more honest than any tidy narrative could be. The recurring image in her life, the one she herself returns to most often, in interviews and in her memoir, and in the quieter, more unguarded moments when she talks about what she actually believes, is the dinner table. The Fonda dinner table. The one where Henry sat at one end and Frances sat at the other, and the children learned, early and thoroughly, the difference between presence and connection. She has returned to that table in her mind countless times across 80 years. She has sat at it in therapy and in prayer and in the writing that became the memoir she published in 2005. She has tried to understand what happened there, what was lost there, what she has spent her whole life trying to recover from that table. And the strange thing, the thing that seems almost impossible and yet is entirely true, is that she forgave him. Henry Fonda, the cold and distant and monumentally imperfect father. She forgave him, not because he deserved it, not because the harm he did was small, but because she needed to put down the weight of it, because she was tired and the hatred was heavy, and she had finally reached an age where she could tell the difference between justice and peace. Now I want to speak directly to you for a moment, because this story is not really about Jane Fonda. It is about you. It is about every person who has ever sat at a table where they felt invisible. Every person who has ever performed themselves so relentlessly, so expertly, for so long, that they forgot there was a person underneath the performance. Every person who has kept a secret so heavy it changed the shape of their body, who has tried to control the outside because the inside felt like catastrophe, who has loved someone distant and spent decades trying to earn something that was never going to come. You know that table. Maybe your table looked different. Maybe it was quieter or louder or set with different dishes. But you know the feeling of sitting across from someone who is looking through you. You know the particular ache of being not quite enough for the person whose approval you needed most. And if you've been running from that ache, filling it with work or achievement or the maintenance of an image or the kind of relentless busyness that keeps you from ever having to sit quietly with yourself, then you know something of what Jane Fonda spent 5 decades doing. The running is exhausting. It is so exhausting. And it takes a very long time to realize that the thing you are running from is not behind you. It is inside you. And the only direction that matters is inward. She is still here, still thinking, still changing, still, at 87 years old, in the middle of becoming something she has not finished being yet. And the dinner table from her childhood, that cold, silent, beautiful, terrible table, still exists somewhere in her memory. But she sits at it differently now. She sits at it without needing anything from it. She sits at it, and she lets it be what it was, and she stands up, and she goes back to living. The question she leaves you with is the same one she has spent her whole life asking. Not who do you need to become, but who have you always been? Underneath all the performances, underneath all the running, underneath all the years of trying to be enough. Who is sitting at that table, waiting, patient as stone, for you to finally turn around and look.